So welcome to Boston Office 365 User Group. We meet on the third Thursday of every month. You can find us at our website, bostonoffice365usergroup.com. We also have a YouTube and Meetup and LinkedIn. Got all the social media. Today presenting will be Dimitri. Dimitri's also a partner at Turn Digital. Mike Dixon is also one of the hosts, and he's at Wellington Street Consulting. My name is Bill Gunning. I'm a technical lead. I currently work at the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Previous month's session has been uploaded. It's on YouTube. You can, if you were not in the last month, you can watch Metadata's Not Dead with Mike Dixon. So you can find that on YouTube. We're also currently working on loading backlogs of our YouTube videos. So I'll be uploading those soon. And Mike, you going to do the 365 updates?
I certainly will. Thank you very much, Bill. All right, so the first update we have is Microsoft has officially announced that they are deprecating the use of user voice. So to be clear, this does not mean that Microsoft is going to stop receiving feedback from customers. They are just no longer going to be using the product called user voice. For those of you that were not aware, user voice is not a Microsoft product, but rather a service that was provided by a third-party vendor.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They are going to be moving to a first-party collection or a first-party application over in the Microsoft tech community. The migration is being done on a product-by-product basis. Some products are already there, some are not. So, you know,
yep.
Mileage will vary, just as it always has with Microsoft User Voice.
And actually, the Power Platform apps were always on the internal crowdsourcing platform.
Yeah,
they're on User Voice. So it makes sense that this transition is happening.
Sure. As long as they do it consistently, that's all I look for. Next slide, Bill.
Yep. Do you see it? Sharepoint search scope.
That's what I see.
You do? Okay, then it's just not updating on mine. Okay, so I will pretend like I can see it. And so SharePoint search scope is coming to the graph search. So the new unified search bar that's been added to the suite bar across the very top of all of our Microsoft locations is going to be gaining the ability to define scope. So you will be able to choose exactly which sites you want to include or not include within your search results.
So it's happening mid-March. Yep. Okay. Well, next slide.
Yes.
Yeah, the slides updated for you yet, Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
Teams co-organizers. All right. So this is something that I was looking for this very meeting. Would be super awesome. This meeting is a perfect example. All of us organizers are members of other tenants as our primary job. So there's always discussions as to which tenant's hosting which type of thing, and the ability to assign multiple people to be co-organizers. What this would essentially do within a single meeting is give people all of the access that is normally reserved for just the organizer. So, for example, in the case of Teams, that would be the ability to create polls and the ability to change settings, like, for example, toggling the lobby settings on and off and that sort of stuff. So this is a much requested feature, and we're very excited to see this coming.
Okay.
Oh, that's fine. Next is SharePoint Lists Integrate. This is a real simple thing, but I just wanted to draw people's attention to it. Microsoft is doing a little bit of house cleaning around this command bar. The Power Apps and Power Automate links used to be listed separately in the command bar. They're now creating a single header for that called Integrate and moving those commands underneath. Speculation is that there will be many other things to follow to be added to this.
Nice.
And this is why there is speculation that other things will be following. Microsoft has also announced that you will be able to visualize SharePoint lists with Power BI directly within your within the SharePoint site. So I think this will be very exciting and looking forward to seeing this coming. This is currently in development and is scheduled for release in May.
Wonder if you need to have Power BI license or a premium capacitor?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's it. Other than that, we want to give a huge thanks to our platinum sponsor, Turn Digital. They help us keep the lights on and keep everything up and running here. And we really appreciate that. We also really look forward to the day where we can move back to doing these in person and get some pizza on Turn Digital too.
Yep.
Great. So, and with that, without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Dimitri, and he's going to show us how to get started with Power Automate Desktop, which was formerly known as Robotic Process Automation.
All right, so thanks everyone for coming out. We'll dive right in. A little bit about me. I'm Dimitri Arapetov. I'm a digital partner at Turn Digital. I've been working in this industry primarily in consulting for over 15 years. And as Bill mentioned earlier, I helped co-found this user group almost 6 years ago now, and have been engaged in the community long before that. So before we get started, I would like to do just a very quick poll. For those that are in Teams, I want to use the raise hands feature. So can everyone raise their hands that have ever heard of robotic process automation before tonight? Okay, good amount. Now, if you ever heard of Microsoft's Power Automate Desktop or Power Automate RPA, keep your hands up. Okay, we're seeing a pretty good response. Now, keep your hands up if you've ever built your own desktop flow. All right, so still see some hands up, which is great. For everyone else, don't worry, this is a very intro level session tonight, so we want to get you started with just the very basics. We'll start off with a few slides, and then we'll dive into a few demos to really show you hands-on how this could work. And of course, we are recording the session, so feel free to come back after, watch the video, and follow along within your own environments as well. So let's talk about what is robotic process automation, also known as RPA. So RPA is the ability to use technology based on proverbial robots. So if you think of having somebody sitting at your desk that looks like this robot to your right here, and telling them exactly what to do, where to click, where to scroll, how long to wait in between actions, that's pretty much what this is. So you don't really need to be a developer. You don't really need to know much about coding. As long as you know what your process looks like and how you could train somebody else on the process, that's really all it takes to get started with RPA in general. Now, RPA, so, as we talked, someone sitting at the desk, so this uses your computer's user interface just like you would use it. So for opening Excel, you would tell the robot, move the mouse to the start menu, click over into Excel, click into the cell C5, enter XYZ, and then save it and proceed on to your next task. So it really lowers the barrier to be able to automate things, especially for applications that might not have APIs, or for use cases where engaging developers to accomplish an automation might not be worth the effort. So let's talk about some examples to really bring things to life. So one of the most common examples is really around data transfer and migrations. Like we might have some information in a legacy database somewhere, or maybe a legacy ERP system or purchase ordering tool, and we need to, on a regular basis, get this in sync with maybe our e-commerce website. Or maybe we need to sync this over into some spreadsheets so that some daily reports could be developed. And as with a lot of legacy applications, there's really not many APIs available. So somebody is sitting there and copying and pasting and moving things around. This is something that could really be automated and streamlined to really reduce the amount of manual intervention, if any, that might still be required. Another example is data entry, updates, and validation. Right? I'm sure we've all had business processes where we were involved, where we might receive an email asking for a status update on an order, or we receive a PDF file that we need to transcribe the invoice numbers and the invoice amounts into a centralized location. So using OCR, using the different tools that we'll show you today, you're going to be able to do a lot of the same using RPA. Next is around timesheet and payroll automation. So it's very common that your timesheet applications are different than your payroll applications. And you might have hourly workers that enter their timesheets in one system, and then somebody in finance is responsible for running the accrual reports for a given week or month, and then essentially making sure that they're being paid what they worked while performing overtime calculations and so forth. Very common example. This is another thing that could be pretty easily transformed. Another example is employee onboarding. So if you think of a new employee starting with an organization, you're going to need to create an Active Directory account for them. You're going to need to assign licenses. You might need to go and inform different departments that there's activities required, such as putting a desk and a docking station on their desk, maybe informing facilities that there needs to be a badge entered. A variety of other systems might also need to be touched in order to get this employee up and running so that they could hit the ground running on their first day. Now, when possible, of course, we'd like to use APIs to streamline this because APIs are always, a great way to get things done. But a lot of times you have different systems that just don't have a good way to talk to each other. This is another example where RPA could be used to automate the different steps. Call center operations. For those that have ever worked in a call center or with call center employees, usually a phone call comes in and there's usually about 4 to 5 different systems that has information on the customer. There might be your CRM, it might be your purchasing tool, it might be your billing system, and a variety of others where a lot of information is needed right away to be at the fingertips of the person answering the call. I'm sure we've all been on the other side of the line where we call somebody and it takes them a few minutes just to pull up all of our account details before they can help us. So using RPA, we can also streamline going in and touching all of these various systems, given the data points that we have, using different input variables, such as a phone number in this case. ERP integration, right? A lot of companies have ERPs that have been around since the 70s and 80s, and are now trying to get digital to open up their stores and commercial fronts to become more digital. And a lot of times this is a very big pain point where you have to build microservice layers in between and really build up a very big structure to be able to connect the two together. Using RPA, we could do something where on a regular basis, we have a bot essentially going and updating availability of stock. We can be taking orders on the e-commerce and plugging them as orders in the ERP system and really helping to streamline the different disconnected systems all together. Extracting data from PDFs and scanned documents. So invoices are a great example. A lot of companies still use fax to communicate, especially in the insurance and legal industries. And when you have a fax coming into something like eFax and then you have a PDF file, a lot of times there's a lot of manual steps to actually get meaningful information out of that file before you can process it. Using something like RPA, we can automatically extract information and take appropriate actions as needed. Another is to open up internal tools to customers or employees. One great example is to automate some of the global admin type settings or reports that are available within M365. You might have a manager that really wants to understand what their usage is for their team within a given application. And there's really no good way to do that today without giving them global admin rights. But using a bot, we could potentially go to that screen, apply a filter, take a screenshot, and email that screenshot to the manager daily without really having to grant them that level of access. Expense management, receipt validation. This is a pretty interesting scenario where sometimes when you have an expense system that requires receipts over a certain dollar value, it takes a lot of manual effort to verify that the receipts actually match the amounts that are being submitted. But using OCR and using some of the machine learning tools available, we could easily scan a PDF or an image of a receipt, identify the numbers, and see if it matches the number that's being submitted. And last but not least is around sales automation, where if we have a customer information, maybe we have a few different websites that we want to get to really learn more about the customer. This could be LinkedIn, this could be Zoom Info, this could be other places where we want to get a general profile of what this customer is, both external systems as well as internal systems, to understand if we have any active contracts, if we have other subject matter experts within our organization that this customer is familiar with. So these are just some of the examples of how this could be applied to real life. So as we go through some of the demos today, they are very basic because we are just getting started, but I'd like for you to think about the bigger picture for how this could really be applied to drive business value. So let's talk about a little bit where Microsoft stands within the overall ecosystem of the world of RPA. So the RPA in general is a very large and fast growing industry. And as you can see on this Gartner slide from last year, there's quite a few players in the space. Microsoft is in the leader section, right? It's seen as being a visionary within this RPA platform space. And given how new Microsoft is within here, they've certainly made a large splash getting into this industry. We expect when this next Gartner report comes out later this year that Microsoft will certainly inch up, if not be definitively within the leaders quadrant. So when you're looking at using different RPA tools, or you're looking for justification for why this is worthy of your time and investment, I think this speaks volumes that Gartner is recognizing Microsoft as being a leader in this space. Okay, so let's talk about Power Automate, because I think like many customers and many users of the Microsoft platform, sometimes there's a lot of very similar sounding terminologies out there, and it gets confusing. I would be lying if I told you that I wasn't confused between some of the new announcements that were made over the years and trying to figure out what actually means what. So inside of Power Automate, there's really two types of main automations that are available. So the first is API-based digital process automation. This is really what you're familiar with today, meaning flows. So if we want to go and take a look at an email coming into a shared mailbox, and then to forward it to the appropriate department based on the contents, your current flows that you have as part of your M365 suite are a perfect solution. It's easy to connect to the APIs of the mailbox. It's easy to connect to applying some logic, and then to connect to the mailbox again to forward that to the right location. Same thing goes with building data flows within, taking an MS form and taking the outputs and putting that to a Sharepoint list. There's no reason that you would use anything besides flows, because everything is API driven and at your fingertips. The second are really the UI-based robotic process automation. So these are your desktop flows. So this is something where you need to emulate somebody sitting at a desk to do, because there really isn't an easy way to do the API-based approach. And the beauty of this being all under the Power Automate platform is that you can actually combine processes that have a bit of number one and a bit of number two intertwined together to drive the best of both worlds. But that's really kind of the deciding factor. If I'm going to do something that I can do in Microsoft Flow, then you should use Flow. If I need something beyond that, RPA becomes a great tool in your toolkit. So the question becomes, when do we use the digital process automation versus robotic process automation? So anything that's cloud-based is you can use Power Automate, and there's already over 380 applications that have connectors that are available by Microsoft within Microsoft Flow. And if you're a software engineer, or if you're partnering with a company such as ours that does these types of things, you can also build custom connectors to pretty much any application in the world that has an API available. On the other hand, desktop-based RPA, you can easily interact with older systems that don't have an API. And you can basically teach it by having it mimic the mouse movements and keyboard entries of what you would be doing if you were sitting at the computer responsible for completing a given task. So let's talk about how we should approach a project in a Power Automate project planning. The first is to really identify the who, the what, the when, and the why. Without really having a clear objective of who's doing what, what's happening, when does it need to happen, and why it's happening, it makes it very difficult to start to plan an automation. And this really applies for pretty much any workflow engine in the world. A lot of times people do things just because of the way that it's always been done. But anytime you look at process automation, there's always opportunities to gain efficiencies by just thinking about what your end objectives are. And a lot of times that could simplify the technical version of automating those flows. The second is to really design your automation kind of on paper. And I'll show you in my third demo here what I did on a whiteboard before I actually came down to Power Automate and starting to build out the flows. Ultimately, if you can't draw it on paper, then you probably shouldn't go into the technical tools and start to build it out there. Because when you draw it on paper, it forces you to think about what happens in the edge cases. What happens if I need to send this report by 5 p.m., but the data is not available by 5 p.m., and those types of things, where there's a lot of decisions that you need to make. And the more that you plan out how you're going to design this automation, the easier it's going to become once you have your hands on the technical tools, because that way you're decoupling the planning process from the actual implementation process. From there, you can go ahead and you can make the flows, whether they're the digital flows or the RPA flows, and you can build it out. And most importantly, test it. Test, and test. Especially when you get into the world of RPA, there's a lot more things that you might need to interact with. So for example, let's say you're saving a file. Pretty straightforward. But what if you are prompted to overwrite the file if a file already exists? If you're not actually planning for these types of exceptions that would happen in your day-to-day life, you're going to build a flow and it's going to fail the first time it runs because of something a human would clearly say yes, override, or no, rename. So there's going to be a little bit more of thinking and planning you'll have to do around what pops up on the screen that we need to train this bot on how to handle. And last but not least, but deploy and refine. So start using this in production and then see how you can improve it. See what could be refined. See how we can streamline more and more of these different applications and tweak them over time. As one of our examples, say we're going to be interacting with the website. And since it's a public website, we really don't have a lot of control about how it's structured. There could be a new design change or a new layout change that's deployed in a day or two. We don't know that because we don't control it. So we need to make sure that we're ready to plan and to be able to address changes as they occur with external factors. So diving a little bit further into this desktop RPA, there's two flavors of the desktop RPA, and you pretty much build them in a very similar way, but there are a few differences. So the simplest one is the attended RPA. And this is essentially when you would have humans that might need to interact or decisions. So maybe you have a 100-step process that you have to do to generate your invoices every Monday morning. But maybe out of those 100 steps, maybe we can automate 60 or 70 of those steps. We're not saying that you can go and take a nap while this happens, but maybe the human does a few steps, presses a button, then 20 minutes worth of effort gets accomplished in a minute by the bot, and then you pick up and you take the next step. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. And a lot of times you will have humans that will need to make decisions. So back to my point about that save file overwrite question, in some cases, there might not be enough logic for you to develop what should always happen. Maybe a human actually needs to make a decision. Like maybe a colleague's already completed this report and you don't have to make the report a second time. Another part about this that makes it a little bit easier is that because you are already assumed to be logged into your environment, there isn't an extra step that needs to be taken to go and authenticate users, or extra steps needed where we have to go and establish the Windows session and launch applications within the session and so forth. So it makes things a bit easier. Of course, the downside is that when this bot is running, it's essentially taking over your mouse and keyboard. So you can't be using your computer at the same time. And if you click out of the window that the bot is working in, it's not going to know better to go back and refocus the window that it's supposed to be in. So it's literally having a robot sitting on your desk, basically doing some of your work for you. Unattended is something that can scale out a little bit more. And this is where typically you wouldn't need any kind of human interactions for that given process automation. So this is great when you're, for example, taking the first example of copying or migrating data from one environment to another. You just want to set it and go, because at that point, you would have put enough things into place. I see a few hands up. I'll take questions in just a minute. The other part with the unattended is that because we don't need people to be there, we can go ahead and we can schedule it. We can have it trigger based on certain external events. Like maybe we have a customer sending us an email saying, hey, when's my order going to be fulfilled? And then this bot kicks off and then does a bunch of things with your legacy system and then responds back to that email. And with this, Windows sign-ins are also automated. So all of these desktop RPAs need somebody logged in to be executing this. So within this, we'll need to automate that login process and making sure everything is loaded before we start executing. So I'll pause here for any questions. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves.
Hey, Dimitri, I had a quick question right on this. I really like this slide that you have up right now because this is exactly how I'm used to thinking about automation processes. And when I recently tried to do my first Power Automate Desktop RPA, I noticed that the licensing was using this terminology, but the attended was used as a label for the next step up from the free license that was announced. Can you shed some light on that and what that's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So in short, I actually have a slide specifically on licensing at the very end of this presentation, so we'll cover it there.
That's fine.
But there is also a very lovely 40-page licensing guide. If you go to the Power Automate website, scroll to the bottom, it's a nice PDF file that really explains in detail which type of entitlements you receive if you license it standalone, if you have M365 or O365 or D365 licenses, and there's a whole matrix about what is included and excluded. But I do have a pretty small summary at the end here.
In 40 small pages, huh?
Mine is one slide.
Okay, thank you.
And just to be fair, I mean, those 40 pages cover not just this RPA, they cover Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate.
That's cool.
Basically the entire Power stack. Great question, though. Are there any other questions so far? All right. So with that being said, we'll dive into the first demo. As we're going along, feel free to raise your hand within the Teams chat if you have a question that you'd like to ask, because the first demo is pretty short, the second demo is a little bit longer. In the third demo, we really get into it while keeping things at a fairly simple level. But if you have a question, I don't want you to kind of lose track of what we're doing. So please don't hesitate. I'd like this to be interactive. All right. So first demo. Okay, so let's talk about how you can get Power Automate Desktop. We'll start there. So if you go to flow.microsoft.com and you click over to My Flows, you'll see this install link at the top, which will give you the ability to download and install Power Automate Desktop. It takes only a few minutes to do this. I have this installed, so I won't show you the installer, but it's very straightforward. There's also another option here for the on-premises data gateway. We're not going to cover that in today's session, but this is, for your knowledge, used if you need to kick off flows from the cloud, which requires a special license. And we'll talk about that license portion a little bit later on in today's session. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to download Power Automate Desktop. And then we get a nice icon here that we can use to start this. So this is what this looks like. It looks almost similar to your online version of your flows. All of these flows are stored in the cloud connected to your M365 account. So if you were to delete your account, you'd lose all of your Power Automates just like you would with your flows today. So in production, always make sure you have at least one additional owner. So that being said, we're going to start with the very first flow, which is pretty basic. Let's call this Boss 365 Excel demo and click Create. So before I go any further, I just want to clarify, is the screen resolution okay here, or is this appearing tiny on everyone's screens?
It's small but readable for me.
Okay, let me go ahead and let me resize my resolution to cover, say, 1080. All right, is this better?
Yes, thanks.
Good.
Or
Excellent.
Dimitri, make sure you have Zoom It installed. Wink, wink.
I do have Zoom in installed, but I think there's going to be a lot going on, so I want to make sure the entire screen is pretty easy. But great feedback.
Cool.
Okay, so I'll give you a quick tour of this interface before we dive into actually building our first flow. So along the left side here, we have a variety of different actions. These actions include the ability to manipulate and work with variables, This includes having the ability to build if statements, to build loops, to open and read, rename, move files around. There's the ability to have different UI automations, different web automations to launch browsers and take actions, as well as a variety of other commonly used ones. I think the OCR one is also very neat, where you're able to extract text with OCR. We're going to go through some of these as we build out our flows today, but this is basically where your main things are. And of course, if we wanted to do something, we can always just drag it over to our main canvas area, and usually we'll get some questions about what we want to do. Ultimately, this will build out a linear set of steps, as you'll see once we start building this out. Over here, we also have the ability to build subflows. We're in our main flow today, but let's say you wanted to build a loop where every time you have a new record that is opened in your CRM system and you want to go take actions, you could build a very complicated main loop with multiple subloops and sub-features, but a lot of times it's just easier to create a subloop to be able to refer to it and keep it kind of self-contained and be able to test it independently. At the top here, we have the ability to save. So I think I mentioned earlier, anytime you click save, it takes about 5 to 10 seconds because this is saving this up to the cloud. Nothing is saved locally, although there's probably a cached version somewhere. We have a toolbar up top that we'll talk about in a little bit. We also have variables on a few different panels here on the right side. The first panel is variables, where we can build input or output variables. So here, if we have something where we want to collect user input before we start, or if we want to generate some outputs that could be passed on to another Power Automate Desktop flow or a flow in the cloud, we have the ability to define that. Any kind of variables that are generated by any of the actions that we interact with here will automatically be added under flow variables here to basically signify these are part of the flow that we're building. If I move over to the right here, we also have the ability to look at all of the UI elements. So when we go and we start to build the UI flows that we'll do in the next demo, we'll be able to see all of the different objects appear here. And last but not least, we also have the ability for different image captures. So if we need to take a picture of a certain screen, extract content out of it, and so forth, we have an ability to store how we want to manage the images. Given that images are a little bit more of an advanced topic, we're not going to cover images today, but we will be covering the variables and the UI elements. Okay, so let's get started to build our first flow. So this is really just to show you how things come together. But for example, let's say we want to launch Excel. So we'll bring Excel here. We'll be given a set of options. Do we want to start with a blank document or open a specific document? I think we could start with a blank document. Do we want to make this visible so that it's visible to the UI? I think we definitely don't want this to run in the background. We want to see it as it progresses. We have some abilities to have advanced features. The actions will have different options for you here. In this example, we have the ability for whether or not we want to load add-ins and macros. It's disabled by default, as it should be for security, but you might be working with something where you might need to build a macro on the fly. There's also going to be a section for variables produced. So typically, if you're creating or you're launching an application, you want that instance to be stored in a variable so that you can later interact with that instance, so that you can close that instance and so forth. But let's say you're building a flow where you're launching 100 different things and then you're walking away because they're going to self-close once they complete, like if you're running a bunch of PowerShell scripts. In this case, you really don't need to actually keep track of that, and you can disable this. So that way you lose control in the session once you launch it, but in those cases, you probably don't need it. Okay, so we're going to open it with a blank document. And then I'm going to come here and I'm just going to pick another function that I have here. I'm going to take an action of write to the Excel worksheet. The first option here, see here, it asks us what instance we want to write into. So if we have multiple instances, we could choose which one. We only have one here. And let's say we want to write equals 100 times 100. We want to write it on a specific cell. Let's say column 1 and row 1, which will put us into A1. These are indexed based on zeros. And if we wanted to specify error handling, we also have that option. So we'll click save here. Next, after we do this, we have a great calculation. We probably want to save the file. So I'm going to drag the save Excel option. We're going to pick the instance. We're going to pick to save the document or save the document as. And because we just want to give it a file path, we can go ahead and decide where it should go. We'll come here. We'll pick Excel saves. We're going to call it test.xlsx. Click OK. We also have the ability to use variables, but in this example, we're going to hold off on touching variables for now. Okay, so we're gonna click Excel here, and then once we're done, let's come in here and let's close it. And because we're already taking care of saving it, we don't really need to take an extra save step. Okay, so I think we're good. I'm gonna click save, just because I always like to save things in case something crashes, God forbid. And let's go ahead and run it. So it's gonna launch Excel, it's gonna write those values, and boom, just like that, it's done. Let's see if it did its job. So let's open up Excel. Let's come in here. And of course, I gave it the wrong extension, so let me fix that. And there we go. Cell A1, we have 100 times 100. Now, let's say we're happy with this, but we want to do more. So we can come in here, and before I do this, let me just fix my example here. Okay, now let's say we want to take this and we want to copy this and we want to paste it. So I can click on these three dots that appear when you hover over any one of these. We can click copy, and then we can click pretty much anywhere and click paste. And we can also use the keyboard shortcut. So maybe within here, we want to populate the same thing in column 2 and column 3, and keep going forward. Okay, looks pretty straightforward. Now, the other part is that, let's say, we don't want it to close, or we want to see it actually as it runs in real time. So if we hover over to the left side here, we have the ability to introduce what's called a breakpoint. So I can introduce a breakpoint here, which puts a little red dot here, which indicates that this will run up until it hits the red point, and then it will pause for me to be able to see what's going on. This is very helpful when you build more complex flows, because these things can happen in the blink of an eye, and sometimes we need to troubleshoot why things aren't happening as we're expecting it. If I set a breakpoint here, then it means it'll continue and it won't stop until it gets to this breakpoint. So just to give you a step-by-step to show you what's going on, let's hit play. This is going to launch Excel. So I'm going to click Run Next Action. It's going to launch Excel, and we can see Excel has been opened over here. And I'm just going to move this like this so we can follow along. We could probably hide that for now. So I'm going to click Next Step. We can see it added that value into the cell A1, B1. I guess actually I put column 2 and row 2 twice, and that's why it just overrode the same value. And then we can step it through, and then it's going to close Excel, and there's our file that we just created. So I'm going to pause here for any questions. I think this was our first demo, just to give you kind of the basics of what these different actions are and how they all tie in together. Are there any questions so far? Jeff, go ahead.
So it handled the overwrite automatically?
For the cell value,
No, for the save Excel.
No, actually, so there's no built-in action within this feature to go and override the file. So what we would do is, if this was a real production flow, we would come in here, we would define what the variable name is for the file name. We would do an if statement with a conditional to see if the file exists, and if it does, maybe we rename the file and change the variable value. If it doesn't exist, maybe we continue to write it that way.
I'm just saying that when that action happened, it did not come up with an error message. It automatically just overwrote it.
No, so this was a little bit of movie magic. I just deleted the file before we ran it. But here you go. Just to show you, if we go ahead and run this again, we're gonna have an exception thrown, or maybe not. Okay. Looks like it actually is overwriting. I swear last time I was playing with this, it was actually throwing me an error message. But there you have it. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Hold on. Let me disable this flow. And on any of these actions, we can actually click in here and we can disable it too. So great for troubleshooting. If I run it again. Okay. Yeah, so it's not complaining. So yeah, I think you're right in this case. It overrode the file.
Okay. Interesting. Thanks.
Yep. Great question. Are there any other questions so far? Okay, so let's move on to demo number 2 then. So demo number 2 is going to be an intro to working with visual objects. So this is being able to interact with those applications that do not have APIs. So we're going to come in here. We're going to open up our Power Automate Desktop. We're going to create a new flow. We're going to call this one Boss 365 Calc Demo. So within here, I want to show how we can open up Excel and manipulate, I'm sorry, not Excel, open up the Windows calculator and manipulate some of the actions there. Now, in an ideal world, I would just come in here and I would, enter the file path to open the application, and then, it would launch it consistently every time. But I want to use this as an opportunity to show you how we can just record what we're doing. So I'm going to click on this desktop recorder button that we have at the top here. Excuse me, I clicked on the wrong one. So I'm going to click on desktop recorder. And this is going to pop up this little window here that's going to give me the ability to start recording what I'm doing. So within here, I'm going to click start recording. And now this is ready for me to take actions and basically log it. So to load calculator, I'm going to click on the start menu. And you can see as I hover over some of these objects, there's a red outline signifying that it's capturing this as a UI element. And typically I would type in calc, and then I would click on the calculator. As you can see here, it's recorded that I clicked on the start button. It's recorded that I sent the letters CALC. It's loaded that within this window, I clicked on the item that came back called calculator. Now within here, let me say I want to do, just say 4, and I'll say times, and I'll say 5. And I actually registered this a couple of times. I might have, actually in this case, it's button down and bottom up because I was clicking slowly, but I can click here, I can delete these two, and I can actually just press 5 quickly so that it doesn't record as 2 separate actions. But this really gives you the ability where if you really needed to just record, you're holding this button down for 3 seconds, you can see that this recorded that element. Okay, so we have, just to recap, we opened calc, we hit 4, we hit multiply, we clicked 5. I think we're good, so we can click finish here. This is going to bring us back to our flow here. Now, the first thing you'll see at the very top is that this is a comment that was added in to signify that this is where we started to record using the desktop recorder. And there's a corresponding comment at the very bottom that we finished recording. You don't need to keep these comments. You can, click on them and click delete on your keyboard, or click to the side here and delete these comments. The comments don't actually do anything. It's really just to help you structure your flow so that if you look back, you understand what the different sections recommended. Now, if you wanted to add additional comments in between, which I highly recommend, especially for the more complicated flows, you can take this. You can insert as many comments as you'd like. I'm working on the mouse aspects. We have that ability to do so. Okay, so let's see what we're doing, right? So we open this, we wait 2 seconds. I think this is good because the Windows Start menu sometimes takes a second to render. We do all of these steps. And the first thing I usually do after I record something is I run it back just to see if it captured every click and every movement properly. Every once in a while, it doesn't capture 100% of what we need, in which case we could re-record that portion and then just drag it in the appropriate order. Or sometimes we just copy and paste one of these and add it ourselves. So let's run it real quick. My hands and mouse are off the keyboard. So it's brought up the start menu. It's typing it for me. It's opening up the calculator. It's moving things around. And the equals button didn't get recorded, if you notice that. So we'll have to come back and we'll have to fix that in just a minute. But so far, this is pretty straightforward. So let's talk about that equals button, right? Let's say we want to push the equals button next. We have the ability to just do a recording session again and redo it. But we also have the ability to come in here and take advantage of these UI elements. So one thing that you'll see is that everything that we've recorded as a UI element so far is appearing here. So we have our buttons, we have our multiplies, we have the fact that we searched for this calculator button, we have the fact that we clicked on the start button, which makes it really easy for us to be able to kind of have these objects that we can interact with. But let's say we want to go ahead and we want to add the equals button. We can come in here and right now it's not doing anything. In order for me to add a button, I actually have to hold the control button and left click on the UI element that I want to add. So in this case, I want to go ahead and maybe we can add another number. So maybe we'll add 9. So on my keyboard, I'm holding the control button now, and this is capturing the 9 button, the equals button. And we also probably want to read what the response is just so we can make some sense out of it. So I'm holding the left control button and I clicked on that. So now we have these 3 elements. We can say that we're done. And now we have this available to us to interact with. So one thing that we can do down here now is to say, okay, let's come back. Let's go to our UI automation. Let's do the form fill-in because essentially this is a form that we're trying to complete here. And let's go press a button. When I do that, it's going to ask me which UI element we want to press. Let's say the equals button. So we select this, we click OK. And if we run this back one more time, it's going to go ahead, launch the calculator for us, press this, and now the equals button is pressed. Excellent. Okay, so we have the equals button, we have what we need, and because we capture this other number 9, why don't we go ahead and instead of 5, why don't we make it 59? We just drag this on here, we pick the element of 59. That's going to hit 5 and 9 before it hits equals. Perfect. Now, let's say we want to take that output and we want to put it somewhere. So I think the easiest thing for us to do would be to go into the data extraction and for us to say, let's get the details of a UI element on the window. So I'm going to drag this onto here. And for the UI element, we want the display, right? This is where it's going to tell us what the result is of that calculation. And it even gives us a nice visual representation so that we're not just, shooting off into the void. So we can click here. And there's some advanced options that are available. So we can use different attributes where maybe we don't want to actually take the text of value, but maybe we would just want to see if an object exists, for example. And then we also have variables that are produced, right? So this is going to be the format and syntax to have a variable is just a % sign, the name of the variable, and another % sign. In this case, maybe we want to just call this, calculation or just calc results. And we'll click save here. So now it's going to read that element and it's going to load the value into calc results. And if I click back to my variables here in the top right corner, we can see this new flow variable has been created for us. And when we go ahead and run it, you'll see in just a second that this variable was read and was stored into this flow variable. So now that we have a flow variable, maybe we want to do something else. Maybe we want to go and take this data that we've now crunched and go right into another application. So we could very easily come back into the desktop recorder, start a recording, click the Windows key, go into Notepad, click into Notepad, and type in the answer is always, and call it that. So now that we've done this, we have recorded our additional steps. This is the second one that was auto-generated. So after we get the value, we put it into the variable, we follow all these steps, and I can click into the send keys value here, and we can insert our variable. So we could put in calc results. We also have the ability for whether we want to actually send keystrokes, whether we can have it send everything at once, or if we want it to type one letter at a time. Actually, I'll do that here just to show you what that looks like. We also have the ability to introduce a millisecond delay in between keystrokes. So all said and done, let's close it. Let's run what we've just built. Click play. My hands are off the mouse and keyboard. It's going through. It's building out what we need. It's capturing that value, searching for Notepad. And then it's going to start typing this out. And there's our answer. So what we've just shown is that we can use applications without native APIs to be able to go ahead and build an interaction and take data from one environment and put it into the next. So I'll pause here for any questions. I see a few questions. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah.
Can it handle? I mean, how does it handle if you're looking for a screen position? Is it screen position or something that looks like the screen you're looking for? Maybe there's two places in the screen that are identical. Will it be able to handle that?
Excellent question. So if we come back into these UI elements, and let's say we want to take a look at the number 4, we can edit the selector. And in here, there's basically a hierarchy of what determines which number 4 you're clicking into. And if I click Edit Selector, we can see that it's starting with the window name calculator. Landmark target appears to be an internal class that the calculator app uses for that section of the app. It looks like there's another grouping within that called the number pad, and then there's a button that's numbered 4. And below here, we have almost like a CSS type of hierarchy that's highlighting which identifier that we're looking to click into. So in this case, this button has an internal value ID of num4 button. And generally speaking, in most applications, they don't allow you to have the same ID to appear for more than one object. But that being said, we do have the ability to modify the selectors here. So maybe instead of looking at the ID, maybe we just want it to look by the name. Or maybe we want to look by the number if there's multiple buttons that look identical, which button we want to select. So maybe we actually want to select the 5th button that has this value assigned to it. So using these selectors, you're really able to fine tune what target you have for this given UI element.
Yeah, but it may take you about half an hour to figure out what's going on and why it's failing the first time.
It very well could be. So it all depends on how the application was built. Something like the calculator that has some very distinct names and zones within the app makes it easy to build this kind of hierarchy. If something is just one flat HTML file that people didn't label properly or so forth, at the end of the day, there would be some kind of mechanism that you as a human would know which one you need. And the trick there just becomes to see what kind of pattern is there so that you could train, essentially a robot sitting at your desk to do the same.
Okay. So it's not necessarily a screen scraper in a sense. It's more, you can adjust it better.
Right. So this is a lot more powerful than just being a screen scraper. But if you did need to use the screen scraping, there is a whole imaging capability that is a little bit more advanced where you can look for specific patterns or specific images and then focus in and click on those areas or extract content out of those areas or adjacent areas. So it does get a little bit more robust. The other part there is that don't forget that this could be a mixture of bots doing part of the work and humans doing part of the work. So maybe this is a scenario where you bring up the screen up to the point where you need to decide which element is correct. And then you as a human click on the right element and you tell the bot to resume, and then it goes and fires off the next 40 actions that would take you a few minutes to do otherwise.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, great question. Catherine, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Is it possible to have it delete things? As an example, open an existing Excel file, select a column, delete the column, and then save and close the file?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so there's a few ways to approach Excel. So Microsoft's actually automated a bunch of the common behaviors as standalone actions, so you don't have to record it. So in your example, delete column would probably be the one that you're looking for. But we can also, of course, have the screen record us taking those actions and then tweak the identifiers for which column we click into to delete. And actually, in demo 3, we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into some of the Excel actions that we have here.
Thanks.
Sure. Scott, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I got excited when I saw your slide heading, which said something about working with visual elements, because I'm immediately a Visio guy, thinking draw in Visio or create something in PowerPoint. Do options like that exist too?
That's a great question. To be completely transparent, I haven't tried that myself. Looking at the left side here, there are a variety of actions, but I don't see Visio or PowerPoint as having pre-built actions for them. So presumably, if you'd be able to record it yourself doing it and train a bot to do the same, using the different UI interactions like we just did with the calculator, you'd be able to apply the same.
I have something to play with then.
Yes. Great question. Mike, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm asking on behalf of somebody from the chat who would like to know, can you share flows between systems or remote executions, like logging on to a bunch of servers to run a single flow?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's where the unattended RPA really comes into the focus, where you don't need human interactions and you can basically scale this and have this run across dozens or hundreds or even thousands of machines in parallel. but there are just some of these considerations that need to be met.
Awesome, thank you.
Get another question before we go on to demo number 3. All right. Mike, is there another question?
No.
Okay.
Also.
Your hand was up, so. Okay, let's go on to demo number 3. So with this example, we want to take something that's pretty recent to pretty much all of us, which is COVID data automation. So, I'm aware, and many of you are probably aware as well, that every month, Massachusetts, or sorry, not every month, probably almost every day, Massachusetts publishes their COVID information, including number of cases, number of deaths, number of vaccines. It breaks down by county, by city and town, whole lot of information. And in this use case, my company has a COVID task force where the COVID task force really wants to be updated on a daily basis for how things are trending around them. And in doing so, they really want to be able to drive decisions for what the office capacities could be for the upcoming week, whether we want to push people to work more from home, or take other decisions in terms of reopening and returning things back to normal. Of course, this is all fictitious. This is for the purpose of a demo. But on a very high level, I went to my whiteboard I have here in my home office, and I realized my markers were actually dying. So that was the first thing I did, is I reordered a new set of markers. But very roughly, I want to be able to go to the mass.gov COVID site. I want to be able to download that latest spreadsheet that we have of information. I want to go in and extract some very specific data points out of that spreadsheet. And then I want to go ahead and I want to publish this as a news page within my SharePoint communication site. So this was my objective, and I'll walk you through how we can do something, very easily. I think this next demo will take about 15 minutes or so. So with that being said, let's come back here. Let's close this. Let's close all of these things. And of course, usually if you open an application in a desktop flow, you should probably close it from within the same flow. But, we're doing demos here, so we'll keep things simple. Okay. So we're going to, actually, before we even create the flow, I just want to kind of do a little bit of digging into what kind of data we want to collect first, right? So if I go to Google and I search for mass.gov COVID, I know this information exists out there because I've seen it referenced before, but I might not be 100% familiar on where in the site to get to. If I click down here, I see that there's some dashboards, there's some vaccine information, and I think dashboards is probably where a lot of the data will live. Within here, we have an interactive dashboard. So this is certainly a use case where maybe we wanted to go and extract some content or screenshots directly out of this Tableau interface that's there. But I'm interested in Excel. If I scroll down a little bit, I have the ability here to download the raw data that was used to create this dashboard that Microsoft is showing us. And I hover over this link. And as you can see here in the bottom left corner, it looks like this link isn't something that just refers to the latest file, but indeed it actually looks like there's a date that's hard-coded within this URL. And presumably every day there would be a different date. And it sounds like I'm going to have to do quite a bit of string manipulation to get the right dates every time. So that's not an ideal choice. Of course, the option's there, but maybe there's a better way of doing it. Another great pattern to look for is always if there's a list of information, like a list of files. In this case, we also have this archive list. And I think an archive list is actually a perfect use case because that will probably give me a list of all of the different dates that are available to us. And if I come down here, I think this looks perfect, right? This is a much simpler page, a lot less content. And I could tell that within this section, pretty much the first link will always be the most relevant one. So even though the actual link itself is a little bit, still has the date formatting in there, maybe instead of, approaching this to extract the actual exact URL, I can just say, maybe I want to just get the first link that appears in this section of the page. So I think with this, we've established a pattern, and I'm not going to pretend that I nailed this on the first try. I tried a few different approaches to see what would be the most stable and reusable model, and this one happened to look pretty good. So now that we have an idea of what we're looking for, we can copy this URL as a starting point. Let's come back into Power Automate Desktop and let's go ahead and let's give it a name. So we'll call it Boss 365 COVID Demo. And let's give that a second to spin up. All right, so perfect. So now that we have this, we have, just like we did the desktop recorder, we also have a web recorder. So why don't we click on web recorder? And when we click on web recorder, it's going to ask us what kind of session we'd like to use to record what we're doing. And they give you a variety of different browser options available. You actually have to have these browsers installed in order for this to work. If I click Chrome and I don't have this in my demo VM here, it's not going to actually be able to do anything. The other part is that if you are using this with Edge, there is actually an Edge add-on that I installed that's called Power Automate that is required in order for the ability to interact with the page. So if you're using Edge, this will definitely be required. And typically you would begin here, but I'm going to do things a little bit differently for this demo. I'm actually going to start just by launching the web automation from here. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be using a very specific action here that's called click download link on page. And unfortunately, this click download link on page does not give us the ability to use anything besides the built-in browser. So for the purposes of this demo, and I haven't figured this out, there might be a better way of doing this. But within here, we'll say we're going to launch the automation browser within Internet Explorer. We're going to give it an initial URL of pointing to here. Windows state is normal, I think is fine. Within here, do we want to wait for the page to load? Absolutely, before we start our automations. And we also have the ability here to clear our cache and cookies, which is very helpful, especially if you're hitting sites that are constantly being updated. And then we can also do things where if pop-ups come up, if we have custom user agents, meaning if we want to pretend that we're an iPhone or a different browser. And we certainly want to create this because we want to interact with this session. So we'll click Save. It's going to go ahead and launch a new browser. And this looks pretty good. Now, the other thing I want to show you real quick is, if we right-click on any of these links and click Inspect, this is going to give us, a bit of a hierarchy that shows us essentially, we have these div IDs where we're in the class of, rich content containers, and basically this drills down. So when we record this web automation in just a second, when I click on this link, it's actually going to record the hierarchy of how we get here. So, let's do it. We'll come in here. We're going to do the web recorder. We're going to say Internet Explorer. We're going to use the current instance that we have open. Oops. One thing that I always forget is that a lot of times this web recorder actually gets hidden in the background, and I actually have to come back here and sometimes more than once remind it to reopen. Okay, so actually, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to record this in Edge because I already have this configured. So we're within here. So let's say we're actually going to go to the COVID task force page. Within here, we're going to scroll down and we're going to click on this link. And that's going to download the file. So we're going to click Finish here. Within here, we chose which file we wanted to download. And in practicality, if we wanted to point to our downloads folder, we can do so. But I actually want to do something a little bit different. I want to be able to select this instance that we want to download off the page. So I'm going to click Save there. And it's going to complain because it wants the UI element. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to add a UI element. I'm going to go back to the page of the instance that we just did. And just like we did previously, I'm going to scroll down to what we need. And I'm going to hold the left control key to click on this UI element. And then I'm going to click Done. And then within here, I'm going to open up my download. I'm going to say this is the UI element that I want. And for the destination folder, I'm going to have a pre-made folder that I have here called COVID data. Click Save. So really quick, just like we did with the selector within the calculator, if I click into here and look to see how it's determining what to open. This is pretty much building that same hierarchy that we just saw in the web tools, in the dev tools that I showed you a minute ago, where it's going to go into main content page, etc. So if you've ever developed CSS code, this is a very similar type of hierarchy that you're using to nail down the exact element that you're looking to interact with. And in this case, if you look at this, this is basically looking at that unordered list, which means the bullet point list, and it's clicking on the very first link, which is beautiful. This is exactly what I need, because tomorrow when there's a new posting, I don't have to tell it to go and match a title of the field or match the COVID data with the date name. It's just automatically always going to go to the first. So this was a pretty quick win. Depending on how your page is formatted, this might not always be such a quick win. So I'll click update, I'll click close. And now that we have this captured, I can actually delete these other aspects, because really what we need is just the ability to go ahead and capture what that looks like and make sure that we're using the right instance, which we are. Let me pause here for a second. I know this was a few steps to get this loaded and to get this tied together. Are there any questions so far? All right. And just to show you that this works, and as I said, as you're building these out, it's very helpful to continue to test things out. So in this COVID data folder, we don't have anything in place. I'm going to click play. It's going to launch this browser within this automation. It's going to go and get that UI element for us. It's going to save it. And my hands are off the mouse and keyboard, and it's doing this by itself. And now we have the file, and because I forgot to close the browser and the flow, it's still open. But if I come here, I have my COVID spreadsheet. Okay, so we'll come here in just a second. But before I forget, I want to close the browser after we extract what we need. So we're going to pick the instance that we have, click play, save, just to make things a little bit smoother next time we run this. All right. So let's take a look at this. So we have this file that we've downloaded. And if you've never looked at this file before, there are a lot of different worksheets that have the data that we need. Presumably, you're automating a process that somebody's already been doing manually, so they would know exactly where they go to get the data that they need. What I'm looking for in particular is this weekly statewide information, right? Because ultimately, I want to get the data of the report, and I think today was the latest date. And I want to see if we're trending higher, lower, or staying steady. So now that we kind of understand what we're doing here, we have this file that we've downloaded. And why don't we go ahead and why don't we launch Excel? So we'll come into Excel, we'll launch it, we'll pick open the document. And within here, we're going to have this variable that was generated when we downloaded a file called downloaded file. So it looks pretty straightforward. If we have a password, we can also do that, but I think we're good here. So once we launched Excel, the first thing we want to do is we want to set the active worksheet, right? Because if we want to pull information out of specific cells, we need to be in the right context. This one is called weekly_statewide. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to set the active worksheet. We're going to do it by name. You could also do it by index if you know the number of it. I'm going to call it weekly statewide. Click save. And then the next thing I want to do is I want to basically tell the bot that I want to get to the very last row. Now I could record a screen capture where I hold the control key and press the down arrow to get down here. The other thing I could do is there's a function or an action rather that will automatically tell me the last blank row that appears. So what I'll do is I'll come in here and I'll say get the first free column or row, which will go ahead and basically populate these two variables, telling me the first column and the first row that's free. And because I want not the first free row, but I want the row before that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a variable action, and I'm going to decrease the variable. I'm going to pick the variable name by clicking on this little formula button. I'm going to say I want to take the first free row and decrease it by 1. Click save. And now we essentially have this variable containing the first free row. Okay, so I guess from here we want to capture a couple of things, right? We want to capture the value of the first column. So we're going to come back into our Excel actions down here. I'm going to expand the advanced, and we're going to say copy cells from the worksheet. So value of a single cell, we're going to start on the first row, first column for column 1, column A that is. And then for the start row, we're going to use this variable feature to say the first free row. And keep in mind, this is one that we've just reduced by 1, so it actually shows us the last row of the content. We're going to click OK. So now that we're copying that, it's copying that into our clipboard. And we want to come down here a little bit further, and then we just want to, get the context out of the clipboard, and we want to store it into a variable called, let's say, report date. And then we'll go ahead and we'll do the same thing one more time. And instead of doing it out of the first column, we want to get the trending info. So that we're going to look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So column 9. And we're going to store it into report trend. Click save. Okay, so now it sounds like we have a pretty good idea of what we're looking for. And let's be good citizens here, and let's close Excel after we're done taking all of these actions. And click save. One thing I want to mention is, I think earlier I was a little bit confused. Saving Excel will save the file, but this download feature will not override it. It will actually prompt. So before we run this flow again, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to delete this file that was downloaded in the last run. All right, so let's go ahead and let's run this. And let's see if this works the way we want it to. So it's going in, it's finding that object that needs to be clicked. It's running the get file to be able to go ahead and grab it. Saving the file. It's going to launch Excel. It's going to take care of all those actions. And we can see here with our variables, we know that it worked because it pulled today's date, which was the last day in that report, and it pulled the correct trend info, which was showing that this was trending earlier. And then it cleaned up after itself. So now with this information, we can go ahead and we can post this into SharePoint. Before I do though, I'll pause here to see if there's any questions so far.
So I had one, Dimitri. So some of the labels, it doesn't really matter. Like I see when you recording, it says April and it has some of the text. Any issues with trying to figure out what needs to be cleaned up or doesn't when it comes to, like you said, it always takes the first item on the web page, etc.
Great question, Bill. So this is where you would edit the selectors, and you would basically take a look to see, what is it finding on the page, and how is it getting to that element. And to be honest, a lot of times this does a great job without having to mess with this hierarchy at all. But for example, if we wanted to match, April 15th, we can do that.
Oh.
So you can have the ability to really fine tune what it finds.
So that's what it is. You can uncheck a title or something to get rid of something, more unique, to make it more broad.
Exactly. And for example, let's say I just wanted the first link on the page, just in general, I can actually come in here, uncheck all of these things, simplify the selector, right, all the way down to A, and even uncheck, the class, right? So A. So this would just give me the first link on the page if that's what I need.
Oh, wow. Selector. Okay.
All right. So as you do this, if I click this, this means go into this div tag on the page, which is page content, and give me the first link inside that div. So overall, this does a pretty good job just by recording what you're doing. But if you're ever running into a problem, this is definitely the place to go and fine tune.
Great.
I see Adam has a question.
Yeah, I was just curious, like with some pages, especially like SharePoint and stuff, where it takes a while to load the page, is it pretty good at recognizing like, hey, the page is finished loading, or are you putting in like a couple delays or something to make sure, or what's the best method?
Yeah, great question. So when we go to download the file, actually not download, but to launch it, we do have an option to wait for the page to load before moving on to the next action. However, to your point, sometimes you have late loading things and whatnot. So there is a wait variable that we can do where we can just put in an arbitrary wait that says, wait 5 seconds. And then it'll pause here until that time expires. You also have the ability to actually do additional things where maybe you wait for something to load on the screen before you continue to move forward and so forth.
Got it. Great. Awesome.
Yep. Great point. And we're actually about to use that in the next part of when we go to write this into SharePoint. Okay, are there any other questions so far? Kirsty?
Sorry, I just had to unmute. I posted in the chat too. Hey, Dimitri, just quick question, because with cloud-based flows, of course you get a notification should for any reason it fails. Is that the possibility with the desktop flows?
Great question. So there is error exception handling, and a lot of this gets activated, especially with the unattended flows, because you would have no other way of knowing that there was a problem. But with these desktop flows that are attended, you're having somebody sit at the screen and basically playing along with the flows. So they would know very quickly if there's an error that the operation throws.
Awesome. Thanks, Dimitri.
Sure. Okay, so let's go on to the next part of this demo, and let's go ahead and record posting into SharePoint. So I have this COVID task force site that is very blank because it's a demo site, but we'll go ahead, we'll go back to the web recorder. We'll say Edge, and we'll start recording. A lot of times we forget to click start recording before actually doing things, so definitely do that first. We're gonna go to the site. I'm gonna wait a minute or so until the gear icon loads. I'm gonna click on the gear icon and click add page. I'm gonna pick blank, click create page. And you can see here as I'm hovering over here, there's different elements that you can select. So sometimes you might need to adjust exactly where depending on the page. And here, let's say as of XYZ, the trend is XYZ. And maybe I'm going to leave it here because maybe, although I'm automating all these other steps, maybe the person that's actually tasked with posting this needs to take some additional steps to put a little bit of a recommendation or something in place. So I'll put a pause here and I'll say finish. So let's see what we have. So I can delete this first step because we don't need to go to that COVID site again. But we're going to come here, we're going to do this. And in terms of here, we can go ahead and we can start putting in variables. So maybe we could even rewrite this. Trend is currently going, and our variable name, get a little hint in here. Trend is currently going down as of, and then I'll put report date. And I'm not going to emulate typing. Sometimes it gets a little bit finicky with the variables, especially if you don't have the right casing. So let me just reformat this a little bit as of this date. Okay, so pretty straightforward. We'll click save here. And I just wanted to make sure one more thing. When we launch this, we are reusing the same web instance, which I think is perfectly fine. Okay, I'm going to save it. And actually, I'm going to take Excel. I'm going to close Excel when we're done with Excel up top. All right, so let's come back here. Let's clean up before we run this one more time. So let's go ahead and get rid of this. Let's close Excel. Let's get rid of the file that we downloaded since we don't have that logic built in at the moment. And then also, let's do one more thing, which I forgot to do, but sometimes it takes a few seconds for that gear icon to load. And let's just add one more thing here that after we go to the page, let's just wait 5 seconds for that to load. All right, well, let's see how this works. Now, as you could see, if somebody had to manually do this, this could easily take 5 to 10 minutes to go through, find the latest link, download it, put it in the right spot, open Excel, navigate to the worksheets, find the right data points you want to extract, and then go in and put that into another system. But doing this, I can take a sip of my coffee and watch this run and sometimes fail, but watch it run nonetheless. Okay, so this is giving me an error and this is telling me you can't go to this page. I think the problem here is that we closed the browser earlier and we are actually looking to use the browser here. So this is a pretty quick fix. We'll come here. We will Go back into web automation. Say we'll launch browser, and we'll put it into the same instance. And there we go. And in fact, when we launch it, we could pick the initial URL to be the same, and then we can actually even save a step here. And it's going to launch it there directly. So we'll save this, we'll delete this file, and let's hit play again. The other part here is that, as I mentioned before, because we are interacting with the public web and we don't really control the format of any of this content, there is always a chance that some things happen that, we aren't expecting, or there's other abnormalities that, we don't really have control over. But a lot of times, if you're automating something with internal systems, there's very tight change controls, and the format's pretty much to be expected to be the same time and time again. Okay, so this is not happy with me. Probably because it launched it in a smaller window. So we'll come back here, we'll do one more thing. We'll say the window state should be maximized. And these little nuances that we're seeing here are expected when you're building these types of UI flows, because, to us as humans, it's a no-brainer to go and actually go hit another button or go hit another thing. But if the bot's not really taught to do things a certain way, it wouldn't have any ability to know that. This was the pop-up I wanted to avoid, but we can manually intervene. Just go sneak in here and maximize it. Stick your icon loaded. It's able to add a page. It's going to select the default one, and it's going to type out what we're looking for. And that's the end of the flow. And then as a human, I can re-engage the mouse and keyboard and come in here and be like, we should open the office to all employees and guests. Just kidding. So this is basically just an example of how we can take these different systems and mix desktop applications with web applications and really tie together a process that would otherwise take humans. Now, one more thing I wanted to mention is, if we look at the Excel file that we've downloaded, and I think it's not happy with me again, you'll notice that within here, there's a ton of data, right? And what I just did was very quick to be able to just flip into here and pull a couple of data points out that I was looking for, just to be able to show you this demo. But instead of 2 data points, right? Imagine if we actually wanted to pull out a few thousand data points, because we were looking to see, what are the different exposure limits, and what if we had a whole variety of things that we need to jump around to extract. A bot could do it in seconds. Humans would take a bit of time to go through and do everything one by one. So the more you scale this out and the more cumbersome the process is for humans to do, the better of a candidate that process is to be automated to put bots into place. So this brings us to the end of demo 3, but before I go back to my closing slides, are there any questions so far on this automation? Yep, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, question. I saw how you had the breakpoints, which I could see being really handy. Are there ways to kind of like maybe start it just at a certain step, like like where you were kind of honing in on a certain set of behaviors, like, all right, I'm good up until this point. Can I keep re-looping through starting at a certain point?
Yep, great question. So you can right-click on any action and select Run from here.
Nice.
Yeah, this is definitely a lifesaver, especially if you're trying to troubleshoot something 50 actions down.
Absolutely. Nice.
Well, that also lets you set a breakpoint someplace and then move further down and start again, skip some steps too.
Yep.
Which is nice, like any other programming languages as well.
For sure. See Ken, go ahead.
Hi, great demo, thank you. And just curious, how is the logging function and features in this? Because is I work for a regulated organization, and if we do this, the auditors are going to want to see, the processes that took place. So can you show that?
Yeah, great question. I haven't dug very deep into the logging aspect of things. So I probably wouldn't be the best, but most of these actions do have an on error feature, where if there's an error, do we want to throw an error? Do we want to continue to run it? And we can even define different rules for different types of errors. So for example, if we're setting this worksheet as being active, what if Massachusetts renamed what they call that worksheet and it's not able to find it? We could set a new rule that we could run a subflow, and maybe that subflow writes a log file or log something to a centralized database. Or maybe we set a variable name or set a variable that says, we weren't able to complete this section, and maybe we have other logic in the flow to not process this data point because it's not available. So we definitely have options available to us here, but I think your level of logging would really just be dependent on making sure that you're capturing what errors you need to capture and configuring each action to do so accordingly.
Great, thank you very much.
Hey, if I can just expand on that question, I mean, part of what a regulated organization would need, I think, is a record of positive actions that happen, not just errors, right?
Correct. Yeah, it's both. What steps did the bot take, and what actions did it take, and decision points and things like that. So yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure if there's an auditing framework that could be plugged into Power Automate as of today. But I think that would be great feedback, and definitely take a look at user voice to see if there's more suggestions that could be submitted around that. I know Mike mentioned user voice is going away at some point in the future, but Microsoft, I don't believe, has announced an actual end date just yet, and they are continuing to use that as a platform up until there's a replacement announced. Great questions. Are there any other?
So how many flows can we schedule to run at the same time?
So like in the case of the unattended RPA?
Yeah.
So it would pretty much be limited by how many virtual machines or physical machines you want to have running those agents. So if you have 100 desktops or 100 VMs, then that would be your limit. If you wanted to provision more, you could do more. There probably is a hypothetical or a soft limit in the documentation, but it's well over 100. Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is really great. Where are these stored so that you can go away and come back to them again?
Great question. So these are stored inside of Flow. So if you go to flow.microsoft.com, it's stored on the back end. If you actually want to be able to access them from the web browser, you need to have one of the premium licenses that we'll talk about in a minute. But essentially, I can close this, I can destroy this virtual machine and then log into Power Automate Desktop on any other computer in the world with my ID, and I'll be able to access the same list of desktop flows.
So you're getting to it from the regular Flow dashboard?
If you have a premium license, you'd be able to get to it from this Flow dashboard.
Okay, what are you?
Sorry, guys?
Sorry. What are you clicking on to get there? Is it the desktop flows?
Yes.
You click there?
Flows.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you don't have the premium license, the definition of these flows are still stored in Power Automate in the cloud. It's just to access them, you need to launch the app.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Great question. All right, so I'll close out these slides, and then we can take some more questions after as well. So let's talk about licensing. So everything that you have just seen today that we've demonstrated is included in a quote-unquote free license in practicality, it's actually included with your Windows 10 license. So if you don't have Windows 10, I don't believe this will work for you. But furthermore, there is no additional cost to pay if you do have Windows 10. Now, where it gets a little bit interesting. So if you need to use what you have just seen with premium connectors, meaning if you wanted to go and write to an Azure SQL database using the API connections, then you would need a user account, which is $40 per user per month, which will, it's the same license that gives you access to do premium connectors with normal flow as well. And this gives you that attended RPA option. If you want to do unattended RPA, so first you'll need a baseline user that has this license, and then it's $150 per bot per month. So to answer the question earlier for how many you can do in parallel, I think Microsoft scales pretty well, but there is a cost there. And yeah, I think I mentioned this was the add-on license for the $40 per user plan. Also, if you don't want to tie this to a user, and if you already have a per flow plan, which is roughly $100 per flow per month, which is sold in a minimum of 5 units, you can also add on these to a per flow plan. Okay, so before I move forward, I know there were a few licensing questions throughout this conversation. Let me pause here. Are there any questions so far or on licensing in general?
Can you elaborate by what you mean by you can add these on? Is there some sort of a discount or a bundle if you're getting both? Is that what you mean?
No. So this unattended RPA is an add-on license. So you can't just go and pay $150 to get an unattended bot. You can only get an unattended bot if you already have either the $40 per user per month plan or the $100 per flow per month plan, in which case you can add on these unattended bots to it.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is that this license has a prerequisite of one of these other licenses.
Correct.
I see. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Jeff, go ahead.
The Power Automate Desktop relative to Teams Power Automate, same animal but different flavor or totally different?
Great question. So can you clarify specifically which Power Automate features inside of Teams you're referring to?
Well, there's Teams Power Automate, which I've used to create flows within there for doing, forms or all kinds of things. Do same kind of things here. We work with Excel. It's not anywhere near as extensive as what you've gone through here, as far as the toolkit or the layout you've got. But there are a lot of similarities. But are they the same type of thing, just a smaller set of it?
So you're referring to being able to build like this kind of flow within Teams.
Exactly.
Yeah. So great question. So that's the difference between this kind of desktop versus what your normal flows are in Teams are called digital process automation, whereas this is robotic process automation. So pretty much anything that you can use a connector for and that has an API, it's better to use the Teams flows that you're accustomed to. But if you're looking to do things that don't have APIs that require integration with, legacy applications or just being hands-on keyboard, that's where the desktop RPA comes in.
Okay, so they just started using the term Power Automate for everything now.
Pretty much.
It's not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yep. Great question.
It wouldn't be Microsoft if they didn't try to confuse every 2 years.
Oh, you're being generous. Every 2 years. Oh.
I agree, and that's why I think you'll find most of us, Dimitri included, are still insisting on just referring to it as RPA, because it really is a completely different thing.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It seems a much more powerful tool, as you say.
Yeah.
Disconnected from.
Well, it's
digital connections.
I'm not sure that I'd even say that it's more powerful. It's just a completely different thing because you can connect the two to each other, and once you start having that conversation, it's a syntactual nightmare to have the discussion.
Yeah, I also noticed that on your chart there, you did not have. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that in this kind of meeting, but IBM has a product called RPA that I believe is the same type of thing.
I mean, our RPA is a general term for this.
No. Yeah, I know it's a general term. They actually use that term as their product, but I didn't see it on this chart here, IBM at all.
So this is the Gartner Magic Quadrant.
Yeah.
If it's not on this chart, then it means Gartner did not evaluate them as being essentially a significant player within the space.
I'm
In
not
the
surprised.
and you just pointed out Blue Prism is the IBM product.
Oh, it is. Oh, good to know. Thank you.
Great call. Yep.
There was this week on Tuesday and Wednesday, there was an RPA conference in Europe. I happened to speak at 6:25 on Tuesday morning at one of the sessions. But the rpaeurope.com is the URL. All the sessions were recorded. I didn't attend others than the one I presented in, but there was a lot of this kind of thing was covered, just not the Microsoft product particularly.
Excellent.
You said rpaeurope.com, or was
Yes.
it? Okay, thank you.
So just in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep going. Just to close this out. After we're done with the session tonight, we love to stick around and have a beer and catch up with things that aren't recorded. So I'd be happy to answer any more questions during that. But for some additional resources, take a look at the documentation for Power Automate, and this covers both the DPAs and the RPAs. Also, keep an eye on the roadmap. A lot of features that you might want or might think might be there are actually on the roadmap. So this is something that I keep a close eye on, especially when I'm designing in that design phase to see, is what I'm doing possible, or is it something that's going to be available in the near future? Microsoft is investing a lot of money into this to become that leader in the space. So, expect the floodgates to continue to be open with new features and developments. There's also a few great learning paths within Microsoft's learning area, where they actually give you a lot of step-by-step things of, some of the examples, similar examples to what you've seen here today and many more. So if you're looking to really get hands-on screen-by-screen instructions, definitely check out this link. And last but not least, I know Mike's favorite, which is the licensing guide. This is the direct link to it, and make sure you pour a cup of coffee before you dive into it. So that being said, let's stay in touch. You can contact me by my email address or LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter, although you'll probably get a faster response via email or LinkedIn. But with that being said, thanks for coming to my session tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Bill to give us some final closeout sessions as well as a raffle. So Bill, over to you.
Excellent. And yeah, it was very interactive. I really liked that session a lot. So the next thing we go over is upcoming community events. And I put these by date. I'm also going to be posting some links on this chat session as well. But AvePoint is having the Ship Happens conference, April 20th. The MC365 Virtual Marathon, which is a good one. So I pretty much posted them all here. The Collaborative and the Women Conference. Again, we'll have these slides available. When I upload the video, I'm going to append these slides to Dimitri's slides as well, so you'll have the links to these events. Okay. And Mike, anything that stands out with you on any of these upcoming events? Oh, the one event that they changed their date was Teams National Conference. I believe that was later in May. They just changed their date, so be aware of the date change for that one. And
I've got nothing to add to that. That looks great.
Thank you. And then the other thing I want to keep everybody aware of, there's a lot of community call events. So again, I'm going to append these slides to Dimitri's slides. You can go to this website, pnpgithub.io, to get a listing of all the community events. A lot of these meet, bi-weekly, the first Tuesday of the month. I'm currently in the SharePoint one, in the SharePoint framework, which I highly recommend because I'm from the SharePoint side. I think, Mike, you're attending a couple of these as well?
Yeah, I do the adaptive cards, the teams, and the SharePoint one.
So it's great, especially during this time of COVID, just to see some friendly faces every month. I try to go in here. A lot of these events are recorded. So check out this website. You can find the links, the calendar links, and these calendar links also have links to their recorded sessions as well.
Yeah, I would also say, I'm with you, Bill. I love these community calls, and the people that are running these are some of Microsoft's best and brightest. There's a lot of really, really good information in these calls, and they're also incredibly generous with their time. And they really promote a lot of, hey, tell us what you guys want type of scenarios. And describing scenarios where people are hitting limitations. So great stuff. Can't recommend these enough.
Certainly. And what I've learned is to join these meetings 5-10 minutes early. There's usually a pre-talk when they get the meetings going, but they do end abruptly on time. So just be aware of that. There's no after session typically. That's what I found. I don't know what you found, Mike. Okay, and then moving on. We just want to mention the other user groups that are around. There's the Rhode Island user group. It's a great session. The link, again, I'll have these slides appended so you can find them. And then the Hartford user group is very popular with Jared. Jared has spoken on our group a couple of times. And the Granite State user group. This is one that I have joined a couple of times. I find it very informative. And we have some other community groups as well, in addition to those monthly calls we mentioned. I haven't joined any of these, Mike. I don't know if you have.
Not in a very long time. I did the PowerShell one once and the Link one.
Yeah.
Once, but many years ago. They were both excellent, though.
Yeah, I got to get back to PowerShell.
And Bill, not all of them moved to an online platform since COVID hit, so we certainly expect those to kind of re-engage once things get back to normal.
Oh, excellent. Okay.